The Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm your host today. Today, we are going to start a new discussion. We're going to be having a few episodes on this, especially as Pastor Rob is gone. We thought we would cover some territory that's not previously been covered before. And a bunch of staff and actually some of our teachers and some other groups, I think, there's been some buzz around a book that has been floating around Shepherd. And so we wanted to discuss some of those topics and some of those chapters. So we've got Pastor Brett in with us today. And we'll talk a little bit about this book in general terms, and then he's going to dissect a little bit from chapter 1 for us. So welcome in, Brett.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. Hi, everybody.
I can hear them now saying hi back.
For sure.
So, yes, it's great to have you here.
Good to be here.
Always look forward to it. And side note, you're going to be sharing a message on Sunday morning pretty soon, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What day is that?
I believe it's October 6th. Pretty sure.
Cool. All right. And this is going to be part of our Jesus Way series from the Sermon on the Mount. Do you have a sermon?
I don't have a passage picked out yet. I just a couple of days ago was given this opportunity, but I am really excited about it. Looking forward to it.
Well, we are too. So anyhow, in the meantime, the book that I was referring to is called Lead with Prayer. And we will that's what it looks like there. And there's a close-up of it. All right. And this book, I got a full disclosure here.
Yeah.
When I heard that we were going to be reading a book about prayer, that sounded a little bit challenging to me because I think historically people don't necessarily think of prayer as the most exciting thing that they do, and then maybe reading a book about it would be a little less exciting than that even.
Right. I think, even on that point, reading a book about prayer, you might be asking yourself, like, what revolutionary words might be spoken about this thing that the Bible already extensively talks about? I mean, we have a prayer from Jesus himself. What else do we really need to know?
Yeah, and
it's a good book, though.
How in the world could we actually have an entire book,
right,
this telling us different ways to pray?
Yeah, there's like 14 chapters in this thing.
But I will say that I was very happy to find out that I was wrong in all of my assumptions. What's been, in general terms, what's been your take on the book with Lead with Prayer?
So I love this book, and very similar to what you were saying, Joe, I was a little bit hesitant at first, wondering, what all these chapters, what we were going to be able to make out of all of these, but it's a super good book. It's got a lot of really cool stories in it that we as staff have been able to read through together and talk about. Just cool stories about things that God has done, or stories that lend advice to us in our prayer journey. There's also, at the end of each chapter, there are these like prayer tools that you can use that are not only like practical, but also like fun and descriptive, and really help you put some rubber to the road on the things that you just read specific to that chapter. And so I've really been enjoying those too.
I think one of the things that's been really cool about those tools that are at the end of each chapter is that these are things that are working in somebody else's life.
Right.
And they're presented like, it's not like you should be checking all these boxes and doing all these particular things, but it's like, hey, here's an idea. This is what works for one person, so maybe it might work for you, or maybe you would modify this a little bit to how it would work for you. And for me, I think that has helped shaped my prayer life a little bit in seeing some of these tools that have been made available or just being shared by them, talking to people across the country and across the world of what are the prayer habits of people that are leaders.
Right.
And that's really the focus of this book is if you find yourself in a leadership position, which I would argue that all of us do in one form or
In some
another.
way, yeah.
Whether it's our family or work, or whether it's with our friends, or if it's organizationally that we find ourselves a leader. There are different areas of our life, and in some part of that in our life, we're probably finding ourselves in the role of leadership. And this gives us some tools on how to lead in a prayerful way.
Right.
So if you could kind of bring us a little bit into some insights from chapter 1 that you wanted to pull out.
Yeah, for sure. So chapter 1 is part of the first part of this book. So I believe they have 3 total parts of the book that are broken down into how leaders prioritize prayer being the first part. The second part is how leaders grow in their prayer life. And then the third part is how leaders multiply prayer within their organizations. So within the scope of this first part, how leaders prioritize prayer, this first chapter is called Leaders Waste Time with God. And so that's kind of like the lesson of the chapter. And like I said, there are a lot of good stories in this book, and specifically in this chapter, I remember when we were starting this book, I'm like, this is a really good chapter to start on, which makes sense why they made it the first chapter, because it was like, oh, this is a really fun read, really cool stuff in here that we'll get to, and also just like my second round of encouragement for using the prayer tools. At the end of this chapter, it gives some really helpful stuff. It talks about some like tips and guidance and advice about like what a prayer walk might look like that are really a good thing to read through for that. But so some of the major points of this chapter and some takeaways that I've had. So the first thing is that we forget sometimes when we're praying who it is that we're talking to. And they tell this really cool story about a president of a foreign nation that was scheduled a meeting with a pastor, and they showed up to the pastor's office and was speaking with the assistant saying like, hey, I'm here, I'm ready for our meeting. And the assistant said, well, he's in prayer right now, so you're going to have to wait a little while. And so the president had to wait like till the end of this hour-long prayer session that the pastor was in. And afterwards, the pastor came out, and president's all mad, and he was like, do you know who I am? And the pastor goes, do you know who I was speaking with? Like,
Right.
And so that story is kind of a funny little way of reminding us like who it is exactly that we're speaking to, because if you are a person who regularly prays and talks to God about any kind of thing, you can get into the understanding and the rhythms of speaking to God as though he is a friend, which he absolutely is, and is a big part of what this chapter is about. But just also a reminder going into this that he's not just a friend, but like he is the Almighty. He is the Most High. He was the beginning and will be the end. And like just the scope of who it is that we're talking to is something that we can easily neglect at times. So that was a good reminder.
Yeah, he's a big deal.
Yeah, you could say so.
And he's gracious enough to want to have an intimate relationship with us.
Right.
But that doesn't take away from the fact that he's still a big deal.
Right. But at the beginning of the Lord's Prayer, right? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, to speak on the holiness of the God that we're speaking to. Absolutely. Well put, Joe. So another thing that I thought that was really cool in this chapter, they say that of all the leaders that they spoke to, and in this book they make reference of leaders that are serving in all different areas of ministry and all sorts of ministries. And there's a list at the beginning. I want to say there's like 40 different leaders that they use and kind of pulled ideas from and interviewed and spoke with. But they said that of these leaders, they found that their most productive moments in their life came during times of prayer, which kind of feels like obvious. Like if I think back to times when God guided me in a certain direction, it's like, well, obviously that came in a time of prayer. So it can kind of feel obvious, but then it's like, so then why are we allowing ourselves to set aside prayer as something that we're not going to pick up and go to every day if all of these revolutionary moments in our life are taking place during this time? So just a good reminder of the importance of prayer. And then I guess the biggest lesson from this chapter and the thing that really got me excited about this book is this concept. I'm going to use some of the words. I took notes. Some of the words from the chapter say it really well. So they say there's no guarantee that the input of prayer will yield predictable, desirable outcomes. Fruitfulness in prayer is far more nuanced than simply receiving our anticipated answers to our request. And part of me is like, I don't know where you guys are at. If you're a new believer, prayer might be kind of this weird thing to you. And I understand that there are times when it's like, all right, so prayer is important. And I just made this prayer to God. I have this request. And what happens when God's answer is no? It's like, why am I doing this? Right? Because there are times when it can feel like, why am I having these conversations? Why am I bringing these requests before God if it's not something that I can say without a shadow of a doubt he's going to answer yes to, or at least in our timing, right? And so I'm like, is this whole concept of the fruitfulness of prayer being more than just answering your requests, is that just kind of a cop-out for the times when God's answer to our prayer requests are no?
Right.
And to that, I would say no. That time spent in prayer, and this is using some of their words too, time spent in prayer is foundational to the rest of our relationship with God. Firstly, prayer isn't just about requests. Maybe that's something that needs to be said. It's about communing with the Father. It's about thankfulness and gratitude and praise and worship, and just much more than just requests. Presenting requests to God can be something that we do when we're spending time with Him, but the main thing is spending time with God. So even if our prayers aren't always like, quote, successful in getting our requests met on our time frame, they're always fruitful as we're spending time with God when we're talking to Him in prayer.
Amen. And, I think that as an organization, our church has really tried to make a focus on prayer. And we see, Pastor Rob is kind of leading in that direction where, like, he has 3, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday,
right.
or
Monday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah.
We're having an hour of prayer time. Some may not be aware, but like on Sunday mornings, the worship team and the tech team, they come early so that we can practice and have everything ready. But then we stop that and we have time of prayer, so that everyone is in the right place and in the right frame of mind. And we do that privately, and then collectively we come together and pray.
Right.
We've made prayer an emphasis through our Ignite nights, and now we're having Ignite in Gahanna on the first Tuesday of each month, and we're having Ignite in Johnstown on the second Thursday of each month. And it's all to realize, as the title was kind of tongue-in-cheek saying, we're not wasting time with God, because all the time spent with God is the most productive time that we could possibly have.
Right.
So any closing thoughts, any tips from maybe some of the tools, any personal experiences that you've had with that maybe you gave one of the tools a try or anything like that?
So yeah, I it's not in this first chapter, but there's a chapter later on that talks about the different ways that we can pray and give some prayer tools. And one of them is a prayer map, and I actually have it with me. I carry it with me in my Bible everywhere. It has like all the 7 days of the week, and that chapter is all about how you don't just have to, again, make your requests to God the whole time when you're spending time in prayer. There are lots of other things that you can pray about, and one of the ways that they offer you a chance to do that is by praying about specific things on different days, which has been a really fun discipline for me to practice. But yeah, the book is super, super good. Again, the whole point of this chapter is that the goal is to be with Jesus with no agenda whatsoever. The goal is the connection and the time spent with Him, and from that comes a joy that can compete with the most troubling sorrows and trials that you can face. And so if I could just end with a quote here, Joe.
Sure.
And this is from this first chapter. It says, "Every time that leaders waste time with God in friendship, we are restoring paradise on earth. The kingdom refreshes us, flows through us, and refreshes others. And the end result is joy." So that's what this book is offering. That's what the practice and the discipline of prayer offers to us, and it's something that, as Rob has often said, is the one thing that can change everything. It's always the most important.
Well, I hope today that as you're listening to this, it'll be a challenge for you to, quote unquote, waste some time with God. Set aside some time. It will be the best time spent. We're going to put a link in the notes for this book in case you're interested in it. It's called Lead with Prayer. And we'd also encourage you to follow everything that's going on at the church by going to shepnaz.org and to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For Pastor Brett, I'm Joe. Have a great day.
Bye.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.